I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Tom Wellems. Dr. Wellems is the Chief of the Laboratory Medicine and Vector Research and Ophthalmology Genetics Section of the NIH. His research focuses on the determination of drug resistance, immune evasion, and disease virulence in malaria. Dr. Wellems.
Thank you very much, Kumar, and good morning, everyone. In the late 1970s, early 1980s, work on an avian malaria parasite, Plasmodium melliferae, in ducklings showed that one of the proteins was very abundant. It was up to 10% of the protein of the parasite. This was work by Roxy Kalasian, 10%. And when she examined it, it was found to be very histidine-rich. Just think about that a moment. What an amazing protein in a duck malaria parasite, or an avian malaria parasite, I should say. What is its function? Traeger and Jensen had just recently established in vitro culture of Plasmodium falciparum. It was an exciting time in malaria research, a time I was just beginning. And I began to look at possible research projects and decided to join one with Russell Howard at the NIH. The studies of the falciparum malaria parasite in vitro, extended from Kalasian's work, showed that there were at least 3 histidine-rich proteins in falciparum. Remarkably enough, the first of those, called HRP2, soon was found to be associated with knobs of the malaria parasite. Again, a remarkable finding. It led to a number of subsequent studies. These proved to be the cytoadherence points. Now we know today that the cytoadherence proteins, the PFEMP1 or VAR gene products, are anchored in those in association with HRP1. Now, my research project was to look at the other histidine-rich proteins, and Russell with Diane Taylor had found some monoclonal antibodies, and back using the cloning techniques of the time, I was able to clone out a couple of expression products of other genes, and these we identified as HRP2, the second histidine-rich protein, and HRP3. Sequencing at the time was really exciting. You did it by hand. and as it went through, at first I thought maybe I made a mistake because I would see runs of repeats throughout the whole sequencing gel. Well, aligning those, working on them over the subsequent months, it proved to be the repeats throughout the protein. Hexapeptides, they're shown here. The HRP2 form runs of repeats, and then you can see the alignment on the right. Histidine-rich and alanine-rich repeats. Very antigenic. The protein was in the serum. We raised antibodies and monoclonals very easily to this protein, and we began surveys to see what it looked like in other parasites. And here's an early study. This would Ed Rock, who was with us at the time. Whereas we could find HRP1 was sometimes deleted from parasites, HRP2 was present in all the parasites we looked at, all of the ones we had available to us at the time. The protein molecular weight varied because of varying numbers of repeats. And yet it seemed to be present all the time, high abundance, again, very easily detected. And one of the reasons for the detection we soon established was because of the avidity of the antibodies for multiple repeats. You know, we know this today, but we put in multiple tags at the end of proteins. And when you see 20, 30 repeats, it gives a very high detection, ease of detection of the protein. At the same time, I had the privilege of working with David Wallaker on the first genetic cross. And we early on, using pulse field electrophoresis, separated out the chromosomes of the cross, identified that there were 14 chromosomes in the parasite, looked at inheritance patterns, and we saw that the protein, one of the proteins, HRP2 actually in this study, was deleted, but then the progeny going through the chimpanzee and through the mosquitoes, the progeny had a skewed inheritance of this protein, as if it was favored through the in vivo. Still today, we don't know what the function is, but we conjectured at the time that there was something very favorable of these proteins in vivo. And that fits again with 10% level in Loffuret and the high levels in the falciparum parasites. Here you can see the schematic of the cross and the separation of the chromosomes by pulse field gradient electrophoresis. And I'm not showing the inheritance patterns, but that was the title of this paper we published in 1987, that was favored strongly, maybe having something to do with invasion in vivo and in vitro. So based on this remarkable presence, easy detection, and the presence of this in the serum, we put in floated a patent, and NIH approved the idea for a patent. NIH approved it. And this, you can see here, declared that an object of this invention is to provide a method of early detection and diagnosis of malaria infection employing HRP2 antigen or an antibody with specificity against this said antigen. That was in 1986. And there it sat for a year or so until at an ASTMH meeting in 1987 and some subsequent discussions, I met Joe Perrone at the time. Joe Perrone, some of you may know, was behind the QBC method of diagnosis. And he had seen this in the patent idea in the Federal Register. We had some very fruitful discussions, missed a couple of ASTMH sections at the time, I think. The idea that this protein might be brought in with some new techniques of Becton Dickinson to develop a malaria test. Becton Dickinson had used the method of a rapid test for the development of strep infections, throat infections, used in doctors' offices. So the doctor would take a swab, put it on, put it in a lysis agent, put in the dipstick, and then detect the strep throat antigen to diagnose, quick diagnosis of children with strep throat. It was a sandwich assay with a antibody embedded in the strip. Then the antigen would be picked up, and then a secondary antibody with a red liposome colored red would detect this, the presence of this antigen on the strip. It took a couple of years and a couple of runs with Joe and his group at BD, but the result was the parasite F test, and they announced this 1991, 1992, again here at an ASTMH meeting. And then Zul Premji and Clive Schiff worked with the groups, and also Steve Hoffman and the groups, Christine Beadle, to do some studies in the field. And here you can see one of the early publications in '93 where they'd used the parasite F test over in Africa, I think in Tanzania, was it? And they were finding that the detectable antigenemia in these people treated by Fansidar, and 10 days after treatment they were able to detect the antigen. So there was some persistence of the antigen, but still in clinics and in village healths where there was no facility for microscopy, the test was judged to show great promise. And we know today that you can do it and use it in 5 minutes on the back of a Land Rover and get a result where it may take days for microscopy results. And also the publication in The Lancet in 1994 from Steve Hoffman's group showed this promise as well. So there it was. But the uptake on the test more widely took a while. In fact, the years from 93 to 2000 were the kit didn't sell. And Becton Dickinson sold off the kit. Not much was done with it until these ACTs came into play. And beginning in the early 2000s, the advent of the ACTs, the increasing use of ACTs, was associated, of course, with the expense of the ACTs. And there was a growing realization that you needed to have a good diagnosis before treatment for economic reasons, if nothing else. I mean, it's a good idea when you're treating a child, a very good idea to know what the infection is. So many years in Africa with chloroquine, though, fever was equated with malaria. And as the treatments in malaria has declined, it becomes more important to know that the child has malaria or another infection, because you need to direct the treatment appropriately. Here you can see on the left panel the increased use of ACTs. And this is from the World Health Malaria Report in 2014. Hundreds of millions of doses by 2010, 2011, 2012. And you can see on the right panel the push and the need for good diagnostics as the rapid tests were used at first a lower ratio compared to AC treatments. Till today, there are more rapid test uses than there are ACT treatments. So the need for substantial and good RDTs in the field today is stronger than ever. World Health Organization established a rapid diagnostic test performance assay. In this period, the LDH assay, which used to be a colorimetric enzyme determination, switched over to this RDT format as good antibodies to LDH became available, and then a rapid LDH test using the lateral flow format was developed. And this was a very important initiative to put all the different RTTs by different companies into competition and to see what their performance was in a real-life situation and pick the best and recommend the best. And that's in the upper corner here. Vivax RDTs came into play, and use of yet another antigen, aldolase, was incorporated into these RDTs. So this is where we stand today. And of course, in concert with the evaluations has become a increased focus on delivery and use in the village triage setting. And here, for example, this is, I think, one of the most important initiatives of all, is to have local village workers being able to use these RDTs and bring the treatment to the children immediately. So this seemed to be going along pretty well, and then comes the shock. And here I just put up 3 papers that I think were seminal and extremely important, and waking us up to the knowledge that there are P. falciparum lines out there that lack HRP2. It goes against the grain of all our thinking in the 80s. I think this is science. You have to adjust your thinking, you take in new data, and you have to develop new approaches. Chin Chen's group showing that there's a region of Peru where the PF-HRP isolates were lacking. The falciparum isolates were lacking, not only HRP2, but the related HRP3. The study from Kumar in India, Navin Kumar, showing genetic deletion of HRP2 and HRP3, both of those, and false negative malaria rapid diagnostic tests as a result. And then now it's spread in Africa, where Jonathan, who'll be speaking, showed that HRP2 is deleted from the DR in populations in the DRC. So I'd like now to sort of switch the focus of my talk and start as we think about the next generation of RDTs and what some of the ideas we might have going forward. First of all, a bit of a summary here on the features of the antigen-based RDTs, most of them in lateral flow format. And I've discussed some of this. The HRP2 has been so sensitive because of the repeats, and there are new tests out now with even higher sensitivities. You can reach down below 200 parasites per microliter at maybe 8 or 10 times better. You get down, that's still not good enough, but 20 or 30 parasites per microliter is today achievable and useful. LDH assays are less sensitive, and especially as you get down below 200 parasites per microliter, but we don't have this antigenic variation and deletion of LDH. LDH is an essential protein, very conserved in the parasites. Aldolase all along has been very low in its sensitivity, and for that reason the Vivax test and the tests for the other malaria parasites have a lot of improvement that needs to be have room for a lot of improvement. So I'll just bring now a recent study, bringing it more to the focus, looking forward and the nitty-gritty, getting into the weeds in the science here. One of the questions we've been asking is, are there alternative antigens with desirable features of HRP2 and LDH? LDH being so conserved and available, HRP2 being less conserved. HRP2, as I mentioned earlier, also persists after treatment, so we'd like an antigen that disappears with successful treatment, disappears relatively quickly. So at Jianbing Mu at NIH, we developed a program where we looked at many of the proteome databases that are becoming available, looked through the spectra and asked ourselves, what can we find in a search where we look to these protein databases for highly expressed antigens that contain tandem repeats. So here's the advantage of HRP2, essential function and advantage of LDH, strong antigenicity, back to HRP2 again, and conserved in Plasmodium species. We searched through the spectra here and looked at the number of spectra compared to LDH, and over here, the percentage relative to LDH you'll see here. And we found 3 antigens with good representation of the spectra relative to LDH. And I won't go into all the details of the efforts to develop antibodies, strong antibodies against the repeats and where we went from there. But one of them, the insulin-degrading enzyme, was present at 16% of the spectra, had a tandem repeat that was highly antigenic. And so we looked at this further. And here you can see an alignment from of different species, pretty well conserved. And then in falciparum, well, we see repeat variation that we didn't like very much, but we decided to go ahead with this repeat region because the repeats are represented from numbers of like 3 to 15 across different falciparum lines. And then we developed ELISA assays, just as we did for HRP2 and LDH. Here you can see the results. And just to quickly finish up the talk here, where this is the HRP2, strong ELISA, LDH a little less strong, and this insulin degrade IDE assay was even lower. So IDE wasn't looking as good as LDH. And so the net result is, for the ELISA format and the lateral flow formats we have, it doesn't look like we're going to find another antigen that beats HRP2. What about, and here I just show briefly the clearance where we did have a good clearance of this IDE comparable to LDH after treatment. So it comes to a question. Is the difficulty achieving the sensitivity of the RDTs due to the fact that the antibody, it rests with the antibody and its ability to sandwich well in the ELISA? Or is it sandwiching well and we're not picking up that secondary antibody with the sensitivity we need? Here was the experiment. and I'd like you to leave you with this, that with the conventional LISA, or lateral flow, there is a sandwich with the protein, and then you put something on the antibody that allows you a colorimetric determination. 200 parasites per microliter, maybe a little better. There was a method developed by Charles Cantor's group back in the 90s called immuno-PCR, where you put an oligo onto the end of the oligonucleotide onto the end of the antibody. Then you could cleave it with BAM-H1, and then you go into a real-time PCR. What is the sensitivity of that? Well, here are the results from Mu's paper just published. And what it shows is that you can get down to 0.02 parasites per microliter with a sandwich assay in a lateral flow format. That's stunning. That shows you the potential of the antibodies to give you a signal if you can put a suitable sensor on the end of the antibody. So this is where I think as malariologists, we'd like to talk with the black matter physicists and the nanotechnologists. What is there out there? PCR is difficult in the field, right? Can we find a sensor, a particle, some element that can attach that second antibody that can be detected with a handheld device in an instant? If we can do that, we can have a new generation of RDTs that are going to detect better than a parasite per microliter, which is where we need to be with the silent burden and the study and the eradication going forward. Even with the IDE, which is lower expressed in the parasites, we were achieving less than a parasite per microliter. So I'll conclude with that. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tom. Questions afterwards.